My stepmother was great at first, but then she started poisoning me. My mom dying was the single most devastating thing I ever experienced. I loved her so much. I think it was down to my dad being so cold and distant, and my mother always being there to give me what I craved from my father. We had only just buried my mom. He didn't even wait a month. My mother's side of the bed wasn't even cold before Susan took her place. She was nice, and for a while she tried her best to fill in the gaps I'd missed since my mom died. She would take me on trips and buy me stuff, and it did feel nice to have a mother figure in my life again. We were starting to bond. To be honest, if it wasn't for Susan, I would have been alone with my grief. My dad and I were never that close. He worked long hours, and even if he was at home, he was never interested in me. I always got the feeling he resented me. I loved him because he was my dad, but there was no real love there. It wasn't long after the honeymoon that Susan's behavior started to change. It started with my dog. Max was the cutest Jack Russell on the planet. My mother bought him for me when I was sick in the hospital one Christmas. It was to make up for me having to spend Christmas Day on a drip and being too sick to get out of the hospital bed. My dad never liked the dog, and Susan knew this. They argued about him constantly, and after a very heated argument, I woke up to find my dog gone. When I asked Susan about him, she snapped at me and told me my dad hated the dog, and that was it. That was the first time I'd seen a different side to her. I was sick a lot as a kid. The doctors never found a reason for it. So when I started getting sick again, I didn't think much of it. When my dad cooked for us one evening, I was struggling to eat due to the pains in my stomach, so I was just sitting there picking at my dad's lumpy potatoes. This must have annoyed Susan, who was glaring at me from the other side of the table. "If you're not going to eat, you can starve up in your room," she shouted as she picked up my plate and smashed it off the ground. After that night, her behavior completely changed. She became cold and spiteful, and became weirdly concerned about me eating. She was at her worst when my dad was in the room. I had to ask her for permission to eat, and depending on her mood, I either starved or she would sit and watch, making sure I ate every morsel of food. It felt like she was unraveling. Her mental stare seemed to get worse as the months progressed. She became paranoid and started asking me strange questions about how I was feeling. She would ask about how I felt toward my dad and how he felt towards me. I was starting to get scared. My dad always hated how close me and my mother were, so it was like she was trying to please my dad by being horrible to me. When Susan went away for a few days, she cooked up a load of dinners for me and my dad and put them in the fridge for when she was gone. When I ate the first meal, I got violently sick. When the same thing happened the second time, I knew she was trying to poison me. I went and told my dad, but he didn't believe me and called me a horrible little liar. He made me sit and watch as he ate some, and when he didn't get sick, he made me eat the rest of the food left in the fridge. The night Susan came home, my father decided to cook dinner to welcome her back. Susan was helping my dad finish, so I figured this was her chance to put the poison in my food. So I planned to switch the plates when she wasn't looking. As we all sat there eating, I kept looking at Susan, waiting for her to start choking or start screaming in agonizing pain. I'll be honest, I was getting a bit of a thrill waiting for her to croak it. As we all sat eating our food, my dad turned to me with a sinister grin on his face and asked me how my food tasted. I told him it was the best thing I ever ate while staring at Susan. Then my dad let out a gut-wrenching scream. Holding his throat, he fell to the floor, gasping for breath. I watched in disbelief as my father quickly succumbed to the poison he thought was in my dinner. Susan looked at me and gave me a friendly smile. I couldn't know for sure if he was trying to poison you, so when I went away, I had the food tested. "How did you know he was poisoning me?" I asked. "When I fed Max some of the food you left on your plate, he got sick. When I brought him to the vet, they told me he was poisoned. He should be okay in a couple more days. Now eat up and we can have ice cream later."